but I do know that we have many who have said, please record this so I can watch it. So we're going to go ahead and get started with Gary and Allison from SREB, and they are just going to do about 10 minutes to talk to you about a couple of opportunities for grants that they have available for schools. So Gary and Allison, I will just turn it over to you and let you share what you've got.
Thank you, Julie, and can everybody hear me okay, hopefully? All right,
Yep.
Great. I was having a little audio problem when I first logged on, and I finally realized my speakers were turned off. I'd had a stack of books on them, so they weren't working. Well, I'm Gary Wrinkle, as she said. I'm with Southern Regional Education Board, SREB, and I'm the state director for district and our district partnerships for Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, and New Mexico. And so I just recently had Arkansas added to my list, and so we're spending some time in Arkansas, learning about the needs and also offering some grants that we've been provided. And honestly, most of our grants have been taken already, but we've got we may have some opportunity for some more coming. But we've offered up about 6 to 8 of those grants, and so far I've had about 6 different school districts take us up on those things in Arkansas. But I'm not sure how familiar you are with SREB, so just real quickly, Southern Regional Education Board is a consortium of the 16 southern states. Arkansas, of course, being one of those 16 southern states. Your Governor Hutchinson, was actually the chair of our board about a year, or I think 2 years ago. Every year, the governors get together and choose a chair. So we work with higher ed, we work with state legislators on policy, those sorts of things. And that's been going on since 1948. In the mid 80s, those same legislators asked us to start working directly in schools. And so we started a school improvement model called High Schools at Work in the mid 80s. And then we also have middle schools at work. And in the last couple of years, we've actually created an elementary program for schools as well. And so we're a school improvement organization. We're the largest and oldest school improvement organization in the country. And we know that we'd like to partner with schools across, the country to help them improve, and whatever that means. Those grants that we've had, and like I say, possibly we'll have some more. And the ones that we've offered, we have not got paperwork back from all those. And so if some of those schools don't follow through, those could come back and be available. But those were really aimed at helping schools focus on a problem of practice, and using what we call a 6-step problem solving process to help schools work through that problem of practice. Typically, we'll work with a focus team of teachers, thoroughly identify the problem. We'll go through a root cause analysis process with them, really help them understand what is the underlying causes of those issues. We go through a research process, and then, of course, goal setting, and then selecting recommendations about what they should do in order to address that problem. And then it kind of comes full circle back to the leadership team, and the leadership team either approves or doesn't approve, whatever those recommendations are. But it's really a way of engaging teachers in a leadership structure within a school and providing them a structure to go through this problem solving process, so they really learn about strong leadership strategies and practices and distributive leadership models, and helps them really learn how to do root cause analysis. A lot of schools, we're all guilty of having a problem in a school and gathering the smartest people in the school around a table and saying, okay, what are we going to do to address that problem? And everybody comes up with these great solutions, and so we go implement, but we totally leave out the whole root cause analysis process of why does that problem exist? And so we're really helping schools kind of step back from a problem, really understand why a problem exists, and then research how do you address those whys, how do you address those causes, because it's addressing the causes that truly solves the problem. And so that's what that's all about, and that's what we're doing with schools with the grant, and just talking to them about whatever their problems of practice are that they would like help addressing, and then we'll coach those lead teachers through that process to help them develop the recommendations about how to improve. It's a $20,000 grant per district or per campus, and then of course that goes and supports the coaching and support that they get, and then there's money left over also to pay for subs and anything of that kind. SREB has a plethora of supports for schools. I've asked Allison to post in the chat a link, And that link has just a one-page flyer that I hope each of you will look at. And on that flyer, there are blue live links. And so anything you see on that flyer that may be of interest to you or your district, you can click on, and it'll take you to more information about it. And you know, anything you see that you have questions about, you can reach out to me or Allison, either one. Our contact information's on that flyer, so be happy to address that with you. One of the things that SREB was asked to do by the governors of the states too, was to help with this whole idea of coming back, you know, to school and how we're going to get kids back to where they need to be. And so one thing that SREB does have, I do want to mention that's on that flyer, is a readiness curriculum, readiness courses, and training for teachers on what we call readiness. And it's in two areas. It's in literacy and math. When we have a readiness not yet, it's kind of not ready for college for seniors, and we have a readiness courses not ready for high school that can be for either 8th graders or freshmen. And these are acceleration models in literacy and math. They're project oriented. And basically the curriculum is free. It's the only thing you have to pay for is for teacher training to get teachers prepped to teach those courses. And they can be taught, you know, either intertwined in other courses, they can be taught as standalone courses, or you can just pick and choose projects out of that curriculum to help in an existing course. But if you're looking at ways to accelerate learning in literacy and math for your students, either at the middle school or high school level, that might be something that would be, you know, really good timing for where we are in the country right now. So I just encourage you to take a look at that. And again, you can link on those on the document that's been posted. The only other thing, I know you only wanted me to about 10 minutes, so I'm going to go quickly. The only other thing, well, I'm not going to. I want to talk to you about the readiness courses. I want to talk to you about what we're doing with the grants, and then also make sure you know who SREB is. Again, I'm Gary Wrinkle. I'm going to be the director for the state in Arkansas. So if you need anything at all from an SREB perspective, or you just want to talk to somebody that, you know, has the opportunity to go in lots of school districts and see how things operate in lots of different places, just to get some input, feel free to reach out to me either via email or via telephone. And I think Allison has now posted that. Yeah, she's posted that. So hopefully some of you will jump on that link, and I can hang around a few minutes, Julie, if I need to check out so y'all can do your business, I could do that too, but I'll go ahead and hang on for a few minutes if anybody has any questions, and then just kind of sit in the background if y'all need to get on with your meeting.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Wrinkle. Does anyone have any questions about SREB or anything about the grants that they're offering? I will tell you, I've worked with Literacy Design Collaborative years ago with SREB. I found it to be amazing and beneficial, something that we did throughout our entire campus. And so that's why I wanted you guys to have the opportunity to really hear from them, because I know what they're supporting is best practice. And, you know, anytime there's money for our schools that we think might help to connect you guys and give you opportunities, we want to be sure that we share that with you. So, well,
and just remember, we're a nonprofit. We were formed by your governor, the governors of the 16 southern states, in order to improve education in the South, and really wanted to improve the economic plight of the South through education. And so that's where we come from, and that's who we are. So appreciate any input or any questions at all y'all may have.
All right, thank you very much. And if you guys have questions, I will have his contact information, and I can be able to connect you if you need that. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So, we are going to go ahead and get started then with our focus for today, which is leading and managing change. And so we have Dr. Amanda Linn from Arkansas Leadership Academy, who is here with us. I know that she's probably a familiar face to many of you. I am blessed to have been able to work with Dr. Linn over the past many years through assistant principal leadership and master principal and team institute and all of those different things. And I'm a very firm believer in the work of the Arkansas Leadership Academy. So Dr. Linn, I will turn it over to you, and I will share your handouts in the chat in just a minute, and we'll get started.
Okay, well, let me make sure we can get going here. And yeah, I can share my screen. Okay.
Okay, are you good? I see your screen.
Yeah, it says my screen is paused. Can you all see it?
I see your screen, but I see your slides too on the side.
Can you
So-
see, am I on the big screen?
Your slides are on the big screen.
Okay. So you've got full screen of my slides and you don't see me. Is that what's happening?
Well, I think everybody's view is different. There you go.
Okay, because it said here, let me go through this again.
Yeah.
You know, you'd think I've like everyone else, I'm sure on this call, have done about a jillion of these, and you'd think I'd be just Johnny.
It's okay. I'll give you a second to figure that out. I see that Mr. Grant is here, and Mr. Grant is the new director of Arch Forward, who will be starting on July the 1st. So Mr. Grant, do you want to say hello? These are our Arch Forward leaders. We've got principals, we've got curriculum, a little bit of everything.
Good morning. I'm just going to be in and out. Just thought I'd get on early and excited about the new opportunities and looking forward to all the information that's coming out today.
All right, thank you.
Okay, how's that? Does that look right?
Perfect. Yep, that's perfect.
Okay. Well, so good morning, y'all. Thank you so much for hopping on with us. I was so excited when Dr. Workman asked me to come and share, kind of have a conversation about change. So she shared with you a little bit about who I am, but knowing that this is the Arch Forward Co-op in sort of, you know, what would be sort of North Central, West Central-ish sort of Arkansas or whatever. Yeah, some of you may know my brother is Joel. I'm the sister of Joel Linn, who is works for the district office and has been a principal at Conway Public Schools. My dad was a principal. My mom worked in public schools as well. So I kind of come from, as Joel's wife says, it's the family business, and I'm there. Also, for some of you from the area, maybe I am related to the Linns of Van Buren and Cleburne counties. But my papa had a bunch of brothers, and so probably somewhere back, if you are a lifelong resident of any of those counties or the surrounding area, we probably, you know, stole your moonshine or your dog or something like that. So I apologize on behalf of my ancestors for that. But I'm real glad to be with y'all today and to share with you and talk about change. So here's how this is gonna listen to me. This is how this is going to go today. I'm gonna share with you some stuff, not knowing how many exactly people might be with us today. The majority of our interaction will be through the chat. However, you know, it's quite possible that, you know, if we keep a kind of a smaller group, and if you guys really want to do some different things, we could probably have some face-to-face discussions as well. And Julie, I'm gonna trust you to let me know if the technical side of it's not working too well, if you can't hear, can't see.
I've got it.
Everything good? Okay.
Yep.
So let's go ahead and jump in here. So I know Julie posted or shared with you 2 handouts, and we'll be using those. Mainly those handouts are for your reference, but I will refer to them as we go through today. So if you access those or however you want to handle that. So let's just jump right in here. So yeah, so we're talking about change. And that's what she asked me to work on or to share with you today. And so to kind of get us going and set us up here, you know, I know just looking at some of the names that are on here, I know some of you have been involved with Arkansas Leadership Academy, maybe not with me, but maybe with our Master Principal program or other resources. So we're going to look at 4 resources about change today. And, you know, you may be familiar, as it says here, with one or some or all of these resources through the Academy or through other learning that you may have had. But I know as you know, as learners, you know, every time I teach about change, and I do it a lot throughout the year, I always learn something new. I always make a new connection and maybe see things with the lens that I haven't seen it with before. And so that's really what we're going to think about today is even if we know or are familiar about some of these resources, maybe we're going to look at and discuss what are sort of the intersections of some of these resources, some of this research, some of these tools, so that instead of maybe seeing them as singular standalone resources as we may have in the past, how do they work together to deepen our understanding of leading and managing change, and deepen our understanding and our ideas about the possibilities of how we apply this information to our own current reality. So to kind of get us started and help us frame our thoughts, I'd like for you to take a few moments and reflect on these two things here. And I'll let you read those and I'll be quiet and give us a few moments to reflect. Okay, Julie, I'm a big old dope here for some reason today. For some reason, I'm not seeing the chat bar on my stuff.
Okay, do you want me to read it to you?
No, I'd like to be able to see it. Wonder why I'm not seeing it.
Maybe stop sharing your screen.
Okay. Okay, now I see chat. You mean
Now
share
you
my
see
screen?
it, yeah. And then reshare your screen. At the top, will you see that bar? And maybe you can see it, because sometimes the chat, you can't see it when you're working off one screen.
Okay.
Is it at that bar at the top?
My bar is actually floating around at the bottom and I still don't see it, but it's not showing up for me for some reason. Okay, well, I will depend on you to do a little reading for me then.
If you exit full screen, you can usually
Okay.
chat. Maybe try that. Thanks, Gary. It takes a village, right? 2020, 2021. We've
Well, and, you know, I pride myself on having my technology and everything in order, and not be that presenter who is fumbling around. So I apologize. This little glitch here.
It's okay. It's part of it. And I think we've all learned.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm just going to go with this, and maybe we will take a little break, and at some point in the morning, maybe I'll fiddle around with it and see what's going on. So my apologies, folks. Like I said, any of you who've worked with me know that I really try to be completely prepared and ready to go. So, okay, so we're focused here. So I wanted to start our time together with you thinking about major changes that you've been through and that you have led others through or are leading others through. And we know that, you know, this past year has been just, you know, a change unlike we probably have never seen. And, I'd like to say that we'll never see it again in our lifetime, but I don't think that's probably the case. But when we think about major change, and you see there that I've operationalized what major change, what we're talking about when we say major change here. It's key here as we go through the resources that we're going to talk about today to think about feelings and behaviors. Not just, like I said, your feelings and behaviors, but also when you're observing others, whether it be your staff, your classified staff and your certified staff, whether it be your parents, your community members, your school board, what do you see? What do you hear when people are trying to navigate a major change? So one thing to keep in mind as we go is we're really going to focus a lot on feelings and behaviors being a major source of data as we think about how to apply these resources and personalize them for our own use, whatever your role may be in your district or in your organization. So we've got, everybody's hopefully got a little frame now, thinking about your own experiences, your own current reality. And so I want to share with you a quote to kind of, as we jump in here with our first resource. So when I went to work for the academy, I'm an employee of the University of Arkansas system, and I had a chance good opportunity to work on my doctorate. And I stumbled into adult and lifelong learning as the focus area for my doctorate. And I can't even begin to tell you how interesting it is and how much it's really enhanced not just my work with other adults, but also my understanding of myself. And it's just been really fascinating, and it continues to be fascinating to focus on adult learners. And so this is one of my favorite quotes. I'm a quotes person, and this is one of my favorite quotes that came out of my study and continues to fuel my work about adult learners. And so my question, using this quote as a kind of a jumping off place, my question for us is this. Okay. Is our focus always on the adult, whether we're talking about a teacher or a principal, a parent, et cetera, as adult? Or do we see the learner side of adults? Okay, we do just like we see, and accept children as being, constantly learning, making mistakes, learning, et cetera. Do we extend that same understanding to adults? And whatever actions we take as a leader, do we support the whole adult? Okay, we talk about supporting the whole child and understanding the whole child, but what are we doing to support the whole adult? And folks, as we go through this, I'd encourage you to remember that we're talking about ourselves as well, not just the people that we work with, not just the people we lead, but our own selves and our reaction and to change and our learning. And so, I would ask the question, are we leaders that seek to understand and support the whole adult? Or are we sometimes guilty of saying, well, they're grown-ups, they should just get over it. Or, they're just going to have to suck it up and like it because that's what it's going to be. And they're grown-ups and they should be able to handle it. And, I will be the first to raise my hand and say that definitely in the past, I have had that attitude as a teacher leader and as someone who is assisting administrators in the schools that I've worked with, even when I started working for the academy full time. And before I, like I said, really got deeper into working with adult learners. And y'all, again, I will raise my hand and confess, sometimes I have to catch myself because I'll still say, oh, what are they doing? Why are they being so difficult here? Why won't they trust the process, et cetera? So I'm constantly having to remind myself, to be the type of learner type of leader who seeks to understand and support the whole adult. So in looking at like I said, as we jump into the first resource that we're going to talk about, we're really going to focus here on this part of Dr. Merriam's quote, and specifically about the impact of change. So the first piece we're going to work with is some information about how people accept change. And as we go through these 4 resources, I'll continue to remind us that, this is not, these resources, I hope, are not just to like give us some understanding or to remind us of some things that we may have learned about in the past, but it really starts to give us some shared language. And you may want to share some of these resources with your leadership team or with other people you work with, because it does give us that shared language when we think about how we differentiate what we do for adults. Just like we, know it's important to differentiate for students, how are we using resources like these to help guide how we differentiate for our adult learners as well. So for what where we're going to start right now, you will need these materials. Pretty much you'll need those materials on the right for this entire session we're going to do this morning. So I'll give you a moment to gather those. I'm sure you probably have them near you. So I'll just explain. The handout there has some basic information that I'm going to elaborate on as we work through this first resource today. But I wanted you to have that just in case you didn't catch something. I will be sharing and we'll be discussing more than that is on just that handout. But this is where we're gonna start. So, how people accept change. So I think that for me, this is one of the first resources I was ever exposed to about change. And as over the years, as I've deepened my understanding and done more work and helped others think about change and leading and managing change, it occurred to me that really the key word here is accept. Okay, and so we all know pretty much what accept means. I'll give us a good old Merriam-Webster version here. And so as we talk about this first resource, I want us to keep this in mind. We're talking about how people process information about change. Okay, when a change happens, what comes into our brains? How do our brains start to deal with this change and sort it out and apply it to our own situation, and all those things that our brains do when we're faced with new information or different information. And so if the information comes into our brain, and then from that, what behaviors result from our inside thinking about change? Okay, our inside thinking about change. So I think this is important, like I said, as we get into this first resource, and then generally all the resources that we're going to do. What do we say? What do we do as a result of how we've been thinking about change? And so if you looked at the resource, I'm frozen up here. If you look at the resource here, and if you look at the bottom of it, I think we're pretty trained to look at dates and things on our research and our articles and whatnot. You'll see that it says here that this original information was pulled together in 1971 and then edited again in 2006. And so, you could look at that and say, man, that was a long time ago, 71. I mean, I bet there are probably some of you who are on this Zoom with us today who might not have even been born in 71. And so we might say, well, you know, maybe this isn't relevant. As far as I know from visiting with, you know, people who I consider to be experts on change, visiting with the person that was the original author of this resource, pulling together information about change, and, you know, pretty much is still applicable today. And so even though our the changes that we experience now, you know, may come at us in different ways, that, you know, basically people are sort of the same as they've been in terms of how they accept change. And so let's think about, again, this language. So as leaders, working with our leadership teams, you know, working with other adults, even, you know, the adults that are carrying out the change, like I said, I encourage you to think about, you know, how you want to share this information, because it helps us as we discuss, you know, what's happening with people when they experience change. And like I said, it helps us to think about what and understand better what we're doing. And you know, why is this important? You know, shared language in the place of the language we might use otherwise when we're thinking about how people are accepting change. It just gives us some options there, because, you know, we're human, and we may say or react in a way that sometimes is not the best. But when we have this shared language, it kind of supports us to understand and neutralizes some reactions that we may otherwise have. So this will be in two parts, okay? And so this is the first part. So what descriptors do we use to classify people based on how they accept change? We know from the research that basically it breaks down into percentages here. And remember, as we go through this, if you've seen this information, if you've worked with it before, remember our idea here is that we're going to connect this information to the other change information. So whether this is a refresher or whether this is a new information for you, just know that we're laying the foundation here, and we're going to pick back up on this language and this information as we move through the other resources. So if you will, imagine each of these squares represents a person on your staff. So there's 100 squares there, and you may say, well, we don't have 100 people on our staff, but you're smart folks. You get where I'm going with this. And so, like I said, the first thing we're going to do is talk about, you know, what we call these people, okay, based on how they accept change. So we know in our schools, 1 to 3% of our people we call innovators. Okay. And you see there some descriptors about the behavior of innovators. I know the first time I saw this, I was pretty surprised that it's only 1 to 3%, because I always thought of myself, especially the longer I taught, as being an innovator. I don't know that necessarily I was or even am an innovator, but because, you know, it's really only 1 to 3% of the people that we work with are truly innovators. And, you know, it might not be the formal leaders who are the innovators. You know, if we're the principal or the assistant principal or district office person or whatever role we play, we may not be the innovator, okay? And then that's perfectly acceptable. It's just who we are and how we accept change. But you see here some of the qualities of innovators. So the next group we're going to talk about are early adopters. And so these are about 13% of the people we work with. And you know, I make a little note there that I found that leadership team members are often early adopters, okay? These are the people who are the doers. Okay, so what do we mean by that? So if the innovator comes up with the idea and gets the pot stirred and gets it started, generally the innovators don't really do the work. They are responsible for getting the ball rolling, and then they are the type of people who move on to something else. Then it falls to the early adopters to actually start to carry the work out, to figure out how to apply and make this idea happen. And so, we say here that they can be creative appliers of an idea because, like I said, they're trying to actually put the legs to the work that the innovators have put out there. So it may require them to break rules, as we said, and ask for forgiveness later. But these people are the people who will step out and take the chance, who will step out and try to make the change happen, try to get the change started, try to make it work. Okay, I feel like I'm probably an early adopter if I truly think about it, and I bet a lot of you are as well. So that's our second group. Then we come to our early majority. So you see there about 34% of our people. And so just even visually, you see that, yeah, they're the first majority. Okay, they're the first sort of big group in our change process. And so, I think we need to remember that these people are influenced by social and emotional factors. So what do we mean about that? Or what do we mean by that? So these people may not be confident enough to be an early adopter, but they notice the work of the early adopters. They notice what is taking place, and they get excited about it. And like I said, they may not feel confident enough to actually step in and be a part of the change initially, but they're watching it, okay? And it's easy to get these people excited and pull them along as a majority. But just know that they're probably not going to step in and be part of the initial work. Like I said, they may have a little bit of the FOMO, the fear of missing out. But they get excited, and if we give them opportunities to learn and to serve along with us, that they can be really important parts of our work. And so if that's the early majority, then we have our late majority. Again, 34%. And just as the early majority may get excited, and are influenced by social and emotional factors, these late majority folks, they need data, okay? They trust logic, they notice patterns. A lot of times, these will be our wait and see people. They may ask a lot of questions. Sometimes they may even be like a pain in our side, because they actually may point out what may not work, but because they need to see something. And we probably, when we identify these people or we see late majority, they're probably not going to put in extra time to work out challenges caused by the change. That really usually applies to the early adopters and the early majority. These people, want to see other people doing it before they commit to it, or they're just gonna sit back and watch, at least initially. And then finally, we have our laggards, and 16% there. You see the attributes there of a laggard. When I share this information with people, I often will ask them to, or point out, when you see those little gray dots, or you put people's faces on there, because those laggards tend to really stir up the emotions in us when we start to think about them as being part of of who we work with and who we carry out change with. And like I said, I think that the thing here is that, sometimes they can actively work against the change. Unfortunately, sometimes they are leaders among our people, but they just may not be using their power for good. They may be using their power for evil. But we all know these people. We've all seen them. We've all worked with them. But again, 16%. So that's our first little section. So before we go on and start to learn some more things about these people, I want to give you a moment and remind us, remember, this is your staff, okay? Whether you have 20 people, whether you have 200 people, it breaks down like this. So I want you to think about what we talked about earlier about your feelings and behaviors, and primarily, really think about when you observe others. Are you starting to see now some behaviors being connected to specific groups? Okay, so I will pause for a few moments and let you think about this and apply it to your own current reality. And feel free to jump in and share on the chat at any moment or at any time. Like I said, I still can't see the chat, but I'm trusting that Julie will let me know if what's going on there. And we're a small enough group that if you want to raise your hand, if someone wants to say something, please jump in and fire away. And Julie, you'll help me look for everybody's little hand raised, because I'm still not real great at that. So.
Yes, I will. I was just thinking, Amanda, as listening to you talk, given the changes that our staffs have been through this year, I think this is a really good opportunity to kind of get some perspective and just think about who is saying what and what does that tell you about kind of where they are. I just think when we've had such large scale change like we've had, it's pretty easy to classify.
Sure, yeah. Well, those a few of you on here I know me pretty well, so you know how I am with how I talk. But yeah, when we have this understanding that of innovator, early majority, early adopter, late majority, laggard. Like I said, it gives us that language to talk about people rather than just call them a jackass, which is what we may call them. Maybe that's an opportunity, an activity I could work into this at some point. Instead of late majority, what do we really call those people? Jackass, pain in the butt. Yeah. Please feel free to jump in on the chat if you have your own pet names. But see, now we already know what time is it? It's like 20 or so minutes into what we're doing, and we already have some words that we can use to understand and kind of classify people. So hopefully that's a win for all of us. So now that we have we've sort of established some groups here based on the percentages of people that we work with. We're going to go into part 2 here. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into how each one of these types of people respond to change. Okay, so let's talk about time first. So the research tells us that here's the time breakdown. And I think it's important to remember here that you may be looking at this and saying, Amanda, in education, we hardly sometimes ever let anything go to 5 years. Sometimes we don't even make it to 3 years. Sometimes we don't even make it to a year fully with a change. So I want to make sure that we understand that this is the average time for accepting and fully implementing change. Okay, and we're talking about major changes. So it's not like these people are hanging around and late majority 4 years and 364 days into a change, and suddenly, you know, at the stroke of midnight for 5 years are like, okay, yeah, I get it now. I'm in. You know, this is a process. So we're talking about the average time for people, like I said, to accept and fully implement. It's not like these people are not doing anything towards a change for 3 years or 5 years. It's just this is how long it may take for them to buy in. And Julie, if something pops up in the chat or someone has a comment or whatever, feel free to jump in and just interrupt me. Because I really don't want to just be the talking head here, even though that's what it seems like right now, for sure.
Okay, we've got something in the chat.
Okay.
Melissa, she says, I think with the changes regarding the pandemic and how it impacts schools, we have seen our innovators help problem solve from the ground up, and our early adopters carry out the work first. But looking at this timeline, it makes sense that even our early majority folks have struggled to implement with fidelity. They just haven't had enough time and data to buy in. Late majority certainly hasn't had what they need for this.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, folks, we're talking about with this timeline, we're talking about when we have situations where maybe hopefully have a really solid strategic plan on how to roll something out. You know, we have the resources we need, all those things. You know, what we faced back in the spring, you know, this time last year, you know, we all know, no duh, it was unprecedented. So yeah, I think her comment's spot on about what we've been through, for sure. So, you know, these are the times, but here's the thing, like I said a moment ago, this is not a clean, consistent line forward, okay? We don't need to be setting our watches, setting our timers on our phones, and to expect that, okay, now, you know, the early majority should be on board. Now the late majority should be on board. So this brings us to the second resource we're going to look at. So if you have a blank sheet of paper, hopefully you do, copy your paper, or use, if you're real keen with your iPad or your Apple Pencil or whatever you're doing, if you would, draw a line like this one on your paper. And for this next resource, we're going to create our own, you're going to create your own personalized resource to remember what you want to remember. I bet some of you already recognize this. So this is the implementation dip, okay? And, you know, it says there, successful schools experience implementation dips as they move forward with changes. Now, why do I say successful schools? Well, folks, people who aren't trying to get better, people who aren't even doing the minimum that may be required to change, they're not going to dip because they're not changing. Okay, it's business as usual, whether it's low level or whatever. They're not rocking the boat or whatever. They're not going to dip. Okay, so it's very normal if you're trying to make things better, if you're, you know, your leadership team and your formal and informal leaders on your campus or trying your district or trying to do things differently, you know, there's going to be ups and downs, as we know. And so to, like I said, again, to get a more clear understanding of what do we mean here by implementation dip, we're talking about a dip in performance and confidence when our adults are involved with a change that requires new skills and understanding. Okay. So when we say the dip, that's what we're talking about. The way people perform and even the confidence they have when we're asking them to make a big change. So I'll give you a moment to note that.
Julie, I was going to add in to that I think that's one of the hardest things about leading change is that just that fear of like, are we going to implement the right thing? If we make changes, will we see a big dip? And, you know, you mentioned that confidence piece. I think we have to make sure that our teachers do have that confidence and that they have basically been given permission to mess up, if you will. Because like you said, if you're going to implement changes, you know, it's not going to be perfect all the way across. You're going to see those dips. You're going to see those times where, you know, it sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. But I think as leaders, we do have to give our teachers permission to fail, if you will, or at least see some of those negative trends and changes for a little bit, because it's not going to just always be an upward trend, and we can't be afraid of that as instructional leaders.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, folks, it's not just fear. I think we can also see the other range of emotions as well. The dip can cause us to experience anger about change, sadness, disgust, you know, all the emotions. And you know, I want to throw in here and point out that, you know, adults are proud, right? Even some of our adults who are just knuckleheads and we just think, oh, they don't really, you know, what do they do? And I don't know that they even care about their job. You know, folks, it's so much of it is just in fear. I mean, adults, you know, we don't want to look stupid. We don't want to not be good at or competent at what we do. And so when we ask people to you know, change what they're doing, it freaks people out, you know, the majority, because, you know, it probably doesn't freak all of us out, but, you know, early and late majority, that's 68% of people that are going to be freaked out. Not to mention early adopters probably freak out too, just they may freak out shorter in a shorter period of time than the other folks. But yeah, you know, we're talking about the emotions here. All the things we go through when we're struggling to do something. So, you know, here's the thing. Sadly, you know, change is implemented and we go down into the dip, and sadly, sometimes people will just abandon the change. They'll be like, well, that didn't work. And they'll just, you know, literally crawl up out of the dip and just move on, rather than try to see the change through. I think that's, you know, that's what we see so much in education. I say education because that's all I've ever known, but you know, that's when our people, including ourselves, get frustrated because it seems like we never follow through something, or we never carry something all the way through. Well, it's because, you know, if we're not really attuned to and understand changes like you mentioned, and if we're not making it safe for adults to make mistakes and giving them the support they need to overcome those mistakes, yeah, we'll just abandon what we're doing. And you know, that you all know what that does to our credibility, to people's feelings about change, is because, you know, literally they may say, well, you know, don't get too attached to that because, you know, we probably won't do that for more than 6 months. Well, that's because we get down in the dip and we don't know what to do. And so we just kind of, you know, tuck our tail between our legs and walk away. The good news is, though, is that it doesn't have to be that way. And so let's talk about, you know, who is going to pull us out of the dip? Okay, who is going to pull us out of the dip? And so if we think about the classifications of people we have, is it the innovator who is going to pull us out of the dip? Well, the answer here is no, because innovators don't dip. Okay, they get the change going, and they have the big idea and they get everything worked up, and then they leave it to someone else to figure out how to make it work. And they move on to the next innovation because that's just who they are. You know, I don't think they're doing that on purpose, shrinking away from their job duties. It's just who they are. It's just their strength that they bring to our campus or to our group. So the innovator is not going to help you. Because they have moved on. Okay, they don't even stick with something fully enough to even have a dip. So who does that leave? Well, what about our early adopters? If we think about what we were talking about earlier about the early adopters, you know, what qualities do they have? If these people are the people who, you know, take the vision, take the idea of the innovator and start to make it happen, you know, they're the doers. They're the people who may apply, you know, figure out how to apply the idea etc. Folks, those, even though they're a small group, they're a mighty group, and those are the people who are going to pull you out, okay? Because they are doing things, you know, they are trial and error. They are okay with making mistakes. They're you know, they have bought into the change and want to actually see it through, make the adjustments, do whatever it takes to make it happen. And so, you know, those early adopters are going to start pulling this early majority out of the dip. And you know, don't we don't fool ourselves. You know, there's going to be a lot of cussing and a lot of crying probably as we try to pull the early majority up out of the dip. And so I think as leaders, you know, we need to be mindful, because like I said, a lot of times your early adopters or your leadership team, we need to be mindful of even though they're early adopters and they're trying to do the best they can and they want to support the change, you know, they're going to experience emotions as well, because, you know, they're trying to pull along the group and get them going. And I think it's important to remember this. So, you know, as principals, you know, we may have gotten the information about the change from someone above us. Someone above us may have gotten the information about the change from the State Department of Education, from the feds, or from whoever is initiating this change. And so we've had time to begin to work through our feelings. And so then your early adopters, your leadership team, generally those people may know some things about the change and be involved in the change before the majority of your staff. So they, you're gonna have time to work through your feelings, work through feelings of being anxious or disgusted or mad. But then when we start to try to pull the majorities along, we got to remember that, you know, they haven't had the same amount of time or maybe the same amount of exposure to the change. And so we need to be patient with those folks and really support them and be aware of their feelings, because adult feelings are real. And I think that if we ignore those, it's at our peril. Because, you know, people who whether you're a child or an adult, if we don't feel safe, if we don't feel someone's in our corner trying to help us be successful, it's going to be really difficult for us to be enthused about changing. So we've got our early adopters and they're pulling along our early majority, and, you know, keep on going and keep on going. Eventually that early majority gets to the other side. Okay, they get out of the dip. And, you know, before we start congratulating ourselves too much about, well, we've now got, you know, 34% of our people out of the dip, then as leaders and early adopters, we've got to support and give early majority people the opportunity to pull together their late majority people, because these are majorities. Okay, so if we empower and support and give the early majority people opportunities to lead, opportunities to work with others in the challenge, you know, there's a lot more of them. And so they can help the late majority. You know, they can the late majority has seeing the early majority carry out the change. Okay, so it's not just, well, you know, of course, as an early adopter, you're going to buy in because that's just who you are. No, the late majority has got to see the early majority implementing things, even struggling with things, so that, you know, as they then begin to buy in. And so, you know, what we know is this. You know, we just wish that the dip happened only once, but we all know that when you're trying to make real change, the dip is going to happen more than once. And, you know, as far as like all dips are not equal. Okay. Generally the first dip is pretty deep. Okay. You know, I sometimes tell people you can expect the first dip at the end of the first 9 weeks. If you're starting an initiative at the beginning of school, because that's when, you know, the new has worn off just enough that people are starting to struggle a little bit. the resources, the things that you may have been able to give people at the beginning of the change. You know, those resources are depending on what they are, that they may be running out, or they may not be functioning as well as they once were. And then quite literally people have run out, you know, they have exhausted their understanding or their skill level in the change. So a lot of times we see a big dip after the first 9 weeks. And so, and we move in, you know, and that happens at a horrible time because the fall is already sort of can be a depressing time and a stressful time. But, you know, awareness. Okay. So we're just going to expect that, you know, in a few weeks after we get started here, that the thing that's going to start to, you know, fall down. But as we just talking about it, it's how we respond. And so we know that, you know, we pull ourselves out of the dip. So the next dip may not, so the more people we get involved with the change, the dips tend to not be as deep and they may not last as long. Because the more people that you have working on the change, the more people you have available to support others to carry out the change. Most generally, you don't have those huge dips like you may have in the very beginning when there's maybe only, you know, a few people who are actually trying to really support and carry out the work. So a few things now as we come to the end of our time talking about these first 2 resources. So, you know, can people change the way they accept change? So if you know, if we feel like, you know, I'm really kind of an early majority, even as a leader, I'm an early majority, or you know, that person's always going to be a late majority. I don't think necessarily we're completely pigeonholed forever and ever into the way we accept change. I believe and I've read and I think I understand that, you know, how people accept change can be situational. Sometimes personal life change, you know, is it a difference between personal life change or professional life change? I know personally, I tend to mostly deal better with professional change than I do change in my own life. Even though, you know, like I said, I know what's happening. I know why I feel the way I do. It's happening in my personal life. Sometimes I don't manage it as well as hopefully I do in my professional life. Sometimes it's personal interest in the change. You know, I may be on board and be really fired up about one particular type of change. And so I'll be an early adopter. But then some other type of change, you know, I may sit back and be an early majority, or I may even be a late majority because I may be like, nah, I'm not really sure about this change. And so I really need to see it working. Sometimes it's who initiated the change. If it's a top-down change, if it's, you know, depending on who brought it up, who put it out there. Some people, like I said, may jump on it really quickly. Others may hang back just because of their opinion of the person who initiated it or the organization who initiated it. Sometimes it's the number of changes happening simultaneously. You know, I may be an early adopter and I may be okay jumping on 1 or 2 changes, but when we have a lot of changes happening simultaneously, I may, you know, even if I'm on the leadership team, or even if I'm the principal or the assistant principal, I may become overwhelmed and may sink back into the majority because I just have to be there. And also, I think, you know, this is very true to what we've been going through for the last year. We can be affected by things that are happening in our community, our state, our nation, and our world. You know, I saw a lot of my colleagues and a lot of my friends who are teachers and administrators this time last year. And as the pandemic rocked on and as we've continued to have to monitor and adjust how we have school, some people that I thought, you know, were really early adopters, you know, I talked to them and I would say, you know, how's it going? And they were actually really freaked out because they just too much happening at once, you know, just, you know, as we all know from watching the news and reading things and everything else, you know, the pandemic was interesting because it affected our whole lives. It wasn't just our work life, but it was also our home life. And so, you know, things that we might have been able to handle if it was just related to work. When we saw, when the pandemic caused so many changes, we might not have been able to handle all those at once. And so the other thing I want to mention here is that even if it's situational, generally people only move one level up or down in how they accept change. I've really never seen a situation where a laggard suddenly became an early adopter. No matter what we try to do, no matter how much we try to persuade them, we could move a laggard eventually up to a late majority, but generally people don't jump a bunch of levels. Like I said, sometimes our early majority folks can become early adopters with just a little bit of encouragement, or if we give them a little bit of responsibility with the change, and so forth. So it's situational for sure. And so last few things here I want us to think about, like I said, before we shift, and we are going to take a little break in just a few minutes. So as we wind up this section, so what if everyone was an innovator? There was definitely a time in my life when I was a younger teacher, mid 30s or early 30s or whatever, where I was like, man, I want to go someplace where everyone's innovating. I want to go someplace where it's a really innovative atmosphere. Well, y'all, if everybody was an innovator, there'd be no one actually to do the work. It'd just be a bunch of ideas. And so, that may be sometimes why some of our changes are not very smooth. We have a committee of people who are designing the action plan or putting together the strategic plan. And maybe they're actually all turned towards maybe being innovators. And so they may have great ideas, but we need people who are actually going to do the work. And so, I think there's no shame in not being an innovator. Because we need all people involved. Then, early majority and late majority, are they without merit? Well, obviously they have a lot of merit, because when you put them together, that's 68% of our people. And so we call the early majority the tipping point. Okay, so once we have the early adopters are online or on with the change, early majority come on with the change. That's generally when the change is becoming or being given more of a chance to be successful. Okay, at that point, generally it begins to be that more people are actually carrying out the change, implementing it, working on it, etc., than aren't. And then we know once we get the late majority, early majority, and early adopters all on track and working on the change at whatever level they are doing it or comfortable doing it, or we are supporting them to do, then we know it's sustainable. So even as, remember, the innovators have already moved on. So even if the early adopters, if some of those people leave our building, or they become administrators or whatever they do, if the late majority and the early majority are on board, then we know that the change has a better chance of surviving. That just because that the change is not tied to necessarily just a few people who are really the champions of the change, that it's permeated through the organization enough that it's going to continue as the early adopters move on and even begin to work on other change. So the final thing I want to throw out for us at this point is this. How much time and energy do we spend trying to change? And folks, when I'm into something and when I believe in something, I need you to believe in it as much as I do. And I need you to be as excited as I am about this change. And so even though I know better, even to this day, I can't tell you how much energy I may spend trying to convince somebody who is just really, for whatever reason, not going to allow themselves to even consider coming on board with the change. And so even though these people are 16%, sometimes it can feel more like this. Okay, they may be the biggest, baddest 16% you've ever seen. And so, what do we do with those people? What do we do? Well, you can retrain them or try to support them. Remember, that they are responding to change as they are wired up to respond to it. You can put them, maybe put them with some late majority people, to kind of come into the change slower. Probably don't want to pair a laggard with an early adopter because it's just going to piss both of them off, because the early adopter is moving fast and the laggard's moving slow. So, you might want to not, even though we think it would be good to send the laggard teacher to watch the early adopter teacher demonstrate the new technology or the new teaching method or whatever, probably that's not the best idea. Maybe we need to send the laggard to watch an early majority person, because again, two extreme ways of accepting change just probably going to irritate both of them. So what if we can't retrain them? Do we relocate them? Well, I'm sure as administrators, we've all been on the giving and receiving end of this, people change us gladly supporting people to change schools, to go to another place. But hopefully we're all the type of leader that we feel maybe a little guilty about when we do that to people, and when we really don't want to do that to people, to try to relocate folks. And then finally, it's retire. I never like to give up on people. And so I always have I still struggle with laggards and sort of how to really think about how we truly meet their needs. But, sometimes we may need to help people see that maybe it's time. Maybe it's time for them to move on to something that else where they could use their talents or their interests as a teacher. Because, this change is not going to slow down, and maybe it's just they're just to the place where they need to move on. So you may need to ask them, what kind of punch do you like? Kool-Aid or the kind with the sherbet in it? Who would you like for us to invite to your retirement reception after school? Those types of things. Again, variety of things. So the big idea here, and as we come to the end of talking about these first two resources. What if we used our energy to support people to be the best they can be at the level they accept change? Now, this doesn't mean that we say, oh, well, he's a laggard, he's always going to be a laggard, or, she's late majority, so, we shouldn't expect a lot out of them. By golly, if they're a late majority, then what if as a leader, we support them to be the best late majority they can be? Because you're always going to have people who are straddling the line. Maybe the late majority just needs to have more interaction with the early majority. But instead of trying to make everyone at once be an early adopter, or even an early majority, what if we, differentiated our support? Now, here's the thing. We know that, at the center of all this are children who are waiting, for us to be good at what we do, so we can help them grow and learn, et cetera. And so that, that becomes tricky because, we want to give people the benefit of the doubt. We want to differentiate support for adults. But at the end of the day, there are kids who are waiting on the adults to be proficient and to be good at what they do. So, that's tricky. And so, but I think awareness is the first step, that people are different and they may need different types of support. So here's some suggestions for how to perhaps get people on board with change. So, the innovators, they're already on board because it was their idea, right? And so even though they may have moved on to another change, another thing, we should try to make sure that our early adopters have access to the innovator, whether it might be an outside consultant or it might be somebody at the district level and we're at the building level. just to make sure, you know, as these people are trying to figure out how to carry out the change, that that they, you know, can continue to return to the original source as they try to adapt it and make it work. And then you see there, you know, early majority, late majority, etc. And definitely as we, after we take a little break, as we put the other two change resources with these two, I think you're going to get some additional insight about how to get people on board and how to support them. Okay, so this is just the first sort of step in the ideas about how to lead this. And so again, just this idea of how people accept change gives us a framework for how we think and talk about leading and managing change. And y'all, you know, this is essential to adult development. I've become increasingly convinced that we're only going to get student achievement to a certain level before it stalls out. It may be already stalled out if we don't really seek to understand our adults as unique learners, and we don't give them the type of support they need to become comfortable, to become confident using the resources, using the processes, etc. You know, they're only going to be able to do as well for the students as we support them to. And so, you know, becoming someone who really understands change and keeps that as a lens for their leadership, I think is essential if we're going to accomplish the huge things that we need to accomplish and the changes we need to make. So far we've talked about how people accept change and the implementation dip. Okay, so I'm going to before we take a little short break, I want to pause formally and let you have a chance, a few moments to chat it up in the chat area. You see the prompt there, you know, how do you connect the information so far with current reality at your school? And thank you in advance for participating in the chat. And Julie, if you will narrate some of that for us. And then if anybody has any questions or comments, definitely would like to hear those as well. So go ahead and jump in, take just a couple of minutes with this.
So Amanda, we had a comment in the chat a little bit earlier from Scott Smith, who said sometimes change doesn't occur because admin and staff aren't willing to have those hard disagreements about how to proceed. They don't want to have those disagreements because it's uncomfortable, and sometimes that is the roadblock to change.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that is that really speaks to us not just recognizing that our people that we work with or we may supervise accept change at different rates. I think that should remind us too that we may accept change at different rates. And yeah, we may be uncomfortable with having these conversations because it's difficult. But you know, a lot of that, you know, if we had a whole day or a whole week to spend together just talking about stuff, you know, I think that's so much where your school culture comes in. You know, what kind of culture have you built so that people are comfortable in you know, and feel safe and feel supported? You know, I'm going to paraphrase here, I'm not going to get it right, but it says, you know, culture trumps everything or whatever. Several people have said things to that effect, but yeah, you're right. It's tough for sure. So that really feeds into after we take our break, the other two resources may be really helpful because I tell you right now, I'm definitely I'm not confrontational. You know, I don't enjoy confronting people. I've always tried to be someone who built a foundation, the relationships, so that when we ask people to change, we've made those deposits. A mentor of mine used to say, we have these emotional piggy banks And, I've tried to make to make deposits in people's emotional piggy banks so that when we do come into a change or whatever, we've kind of laid the groundwork to be prepared as much as we can, knowing that, it's still going to be tough. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things that really reminds me of, we're doing a current book study with some of our principals on Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. And
yes, yeah,
that part about hard conversations and, skilling people up to be able to have those hard conversations, but also building that culture where we can talk about those things. It's okay to fail. I think it really layers nicely with all of the things that you've shown so far.
Yeah, I'm a big Brene Brown fan. If you haven't listened to her podcast, Unlocking Us, I personally am probably funding an Amazon warehouse construction at this point, because every time Brene Brown has a guest on her Unlocking Us podcast, generally that person has written books, and, I immediately go to Amazon and start filling that cart. But yeah, I definitely recommend her and her books and her podcast for sure.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
What else?
Anyone else have thoughts to share, or just want to share them, unmute and share instead of just putting them in the chat?
I just think that, everything she said is great. And I think you mentioned it a while ago, you have to really balance your people. You can't have all of the innovators and all of the, just the different types of people together. And I laugh because I have a couple of innovators who always have just great ideas, and they're always thinking ahead, and they want to implement things that will be great for our kids. But I laugh because I know when they send me the email asking to meet about something that is going to be grand. And so we usually have to meet in the middle, and I will always say, okay, well, make sure on your committee I'll give them someone that's, still an early adopter, or still someone that I know is willing to make changes, but will also balance my innovators' grand schemes out so that we can make sure we're not too far on either side of the spectrum. But I definitely think it's great to really pair those different personalities up together, because I think that it really can lead to some awesome things in your building.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think probably when I first was exposed to this information about how people accept change, I was probably like, late majority, they're just a pain in my side or whatever. But you're right, late majority, early majority, they can slow us down, and sometimes that's good. We need somebody to help us throw the brakes on a little bit. So yeah, absolutely, wise choice. Yeah. Well, so
so
ahead.
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was late. I think sometimes I bite-size change, like, new ideas. I bite-size those out to, like, innovators will bring ideas. We bite-size it out to early adopters, and then no one else even knows about it yet, because there's that fear of, well, number one, rejection before it's even gotten off the ground. You're scared Laggards or even late majority might kill the thing. And so again, going back to Brene Brown and courage and vulnerability, the downside to that, thinking back, and, so a lot of this information I heard years ago with you, and now hearing it again from this role, it's kind of like, well, if I just let it out to a few, no one else knows it's happening. So then it's almost like starting over when you let it out to the masses, because now they need to see early adopters and even early majority working with it in a public way before they're going to buy in. Where I've always, in my mind, I think naturally gone to, I'm going to sneak this out to a few people. I want you to test it out.
Right, yeah.
And then report back. And then maybe you start sneaking it out to the other people, which really it just is going to take longer, probably, is the problem with that.
Yeah. The Trojan horse of leading and managing change. We're going to kind of trick people, and maybe it'll work. Yeah, for sure. Well, you're going to for sure, Melissa, like what we're going to talk about after the break, because I think that totally addresses what you're talking about. Is how can you maybe avoid, what you're saying, because you're right. If you just sneak it in there, every time new people learn about it, you're having to start over. Yeah. I think that's what I took. Yeah. Well, so y'all, let's do this. Let's take a 12-minute break. So this will give you, 12 minutes seems a little weird, but it'll give you time to stand, stretch, grab another cup of coffee, whatever you need to do. I'm going to start my timer right now. I'm going to put, if you want to play along, I'm going to put 11 minutes on my phone timer. And then that'll let me know when I have 1 minute left, and hope to see you all back in 12 minutes. And we're going to finish this out with particularly one resource I bet a lot of you have not heard so much about. So thank you so much for your work so far, and I'll see you in 12 minutes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yep. Well, all right. Well, thank you so much for coming back. Like I said, we're gonna finish strong here and connect another couple of resources to what we've already talked about. So far we have discussed these two resources. And so let's follow through here on and pull some threads together here as we look at another resource that can help us as we lead and manage change. So, as we've talked about already, change causes a range of emotions. People, as we said earlier, accepting change means, how we take it into our brain. And how does that impact what we say? How does that impact the way we act? All of us are processing that in a different way. And, I think one of the most underutilized data pieces, if we're going to talk about being a data-focused, data-driven profession as educators, is behavior. I would definitely, if I dare to call myself a researcher, which I'm not, but if I was, I would definitely say that I am a qualitative person who goes to the qualitative side. I truly believe that for every number, there is a face, and I believe that there's so much that we can be learned from qualitative data, and some of that, you can definitely quantify behavior, but I think there's so much to unlock as far as behavior as data qualitatively, and so. We know that, or this particular resource tells us that if we want to have a successful or a chance at a successful change, there are, some components we have to have in place in our recipe, or whatever you want to call it, to having like I said, even a chance at an effective, impactful change. And so you see those at the top, vision, skills, incentives, resources, an action plan. So all those pieces to get taken together and done well, if we add them all together and as we implement, then like I said, our change has a lot better chance of being successful. But we know that, like we said earlier, change is hard on a good day. And so when we think about behavior and behavior being data, I want us to take us a few moments to think about, what behavior occurs when one or more of these parts needed to support this complex change is missing. Okay, what do we see? What do we hear? What do we maybe even feel from the people who are trying to change, who are trying to lead change with? So let's just talk about for a second, if we're trying to make a complex change happen and there's no vision, or we've not, as leaders, we've not shared the vision for change with the majority. We know that when there's no vision, that people are confused. They don't know why. They don't know why it's doing it. We talk all the time about knowing your why. Well, if there's no vision, or the vision's not been shared and discussed and really examined, then we can make all the action plans in the world. We can buy people the resources. We can give them incentives, et cetera. But they're just going to be confused because they don't know why they're doing it, or they're not real sure why they're doing it. So when we're trying to make a complex change happen and there's no skills or not enough skills. So, we're trying to make this complex change happen, and we are, we're trying to figure out how to train people, how to, we never have enough time to give people the training they need. And, a lot of times we're trying to do training in the summer or trying to do training the week before school starts and all these things that maybe are not ideal. But so if we don't give people the skills to make the change happen, or not enough skills, then people are going to have anxiety. Because as I said earlier, adults are proud, and we don't want to look stupid, and we don't want to look like we can't do our job. And so if we feel like we don't have the training, or we're not being supported, with training or coaching or differentiated support, it's not fair to assume that all adults are going to learn at the same level, at the same rate, just as we don't assume that with children. We don't need to assume that with adults. And so when we don't have a plan for how we're going to roll out at the skills and how we're going to continue to support people in the acquisition and refinement of skills, and then you're going to see some anxiety. So let's say that we're trying to make a complex change happen and there's no incentive. Okay, there's no incentive. And we're talking about maybe it's a monetary incentive, or maybe it's just us appealing to people's sense of why this is important, et cetera. We don't have any incentive to buy into the complex change, then people are going to be resistant. At the end of the day, when a change happens, even the most, even the early adopters among us or whatever, generally we go to ourselves first and we say, how is this going to affect me? And then generally the place people go next is, how's this going to affect my students? This gets into your efficacy and some other pieces that we know could link into this very easily if we want to go deeper. And so, if I don't have any incentive to do it, then I'm not going to do it, or I'm going to resist very heavily doing it. And then what if we have no resources, or not enough resources, or not the resources needed? I think what I always think about when I think about no resources is, how do we, like at the beginning of the year or the beginning of the school year, we may give the teachers the materials they need and the training they need and the, the technology and everything to do the change or whatever, to carry out the change. But if we don't continue to support them, if we don't refurbish the science kits when the teachers use the science materials, or, if we ask people to do something, but then don't give them the stuff to actually do it with, then, we're just going to be frustrated. Like I said, I was a teacher, classroom teacher for almost 20 years. And I just know, I would be frustrated when I felt like I had, I would do anything for my students. And I wanted my students to have the absolute most outstanding experience every day. But, after a while, it could become a little frustrating when I have to go and, spend my time and my money to buy this supply or that supply. Or, I have to go out and seek, maybe even in some cases pay for this training or that training that I need to help me really support me to be effective at carrying out the change. So, if we don't have the resources, or there's not enough, or they're not the proper resources, then people are going to be frustrated. And then finally, what if there's no action plan? Well, without a plan, or if we make a plan and we don't follow it, there's going to be false starts. Okay, there's going to be false starts. So what do we mean by false starts? We've all been there. Change has been passed down and we're trying to implement it. And, oh, no, wait a minute. We didn't think about that. So we got to start over. And then we wonder why people are suspicious of change. It's because we got to have a plan. And like I said, not only do we need to have a plan, but we need to make sure we're following the plan. And are we agile enough as leaders, both formally and informally, to adjust the plan as needed based on data that we're collecting from people carrying out the change. And y'all, the scary thing is that sometimes, you know, we're missing more than one part. You know, if there's no vision, or the vision hasn't been shared widely, and then I don't have any incentive, you know, I'm going to have anxiety, and then eventually I'm just going to resist. Or, you know, if you know, even if you share with me the vision, and you convince me there's an incentive and we actually have an action plan, if I don't have the skills and if I don't have the resources to carry it out, I'm going to be frustrated. I'm going to be upset, and you see how that rolls out there. And so I know that, you know, the first time I was ever exposed to this particular resource, this particular work, I thought about all the times that, you know, we you know, the PTA to buy the iPad cart, or the, you know, the PTA to, or somebody, or we write a grant to sponsor people to go off for training. And so, you know, we maybe have a vision, and then maybe, you know, we're trying to get people trained in the skills, but you know, there's no plan of what to do with all that. You know, it really just takes all these pieces, because we know that if we have all those pieces in place, you know, it's not guaranteed. Okay, don't want anybody to go away saying, you know, that girl said that if we would have all these things in place, that girl is me, that the change would be successful. Well, I'm not saying that it's going to be totally successful. It's still going to be a struggle, but I always like to think about that it's as much as we can try to ensure something has half a chance of being successful. You know, it takes attention paid to these 5 things. And so, you know, as we think about those 5 things, you know, as leaders, what do we want to ask ourselves? And these are just a few questions. I think you could ask yourself a whole lot of questions, and definitely good conversations to have with your leadership team and with other people who are going to help you carry out this change. So, you know, when we're trying to support a change to happen, or even, you know, the situation we were in last spring where we had to make changes really quickly, you know, there's no crime in maybe you have to jump in on a change because it's necessary, like we faced last spring. And so maybe we didn't have a chance to put all these things into place prior to, you know, taking our learning online, or all the things we did. But I think the real problem becomes when we don't, you know, even if we don't start with all these things in place, we don't pay attention to them even after the change has started. You know, once we see people are not motivated, you know, if we do we not revisit the incentives and say, well, you know, maybe we need to frame this a different way, or resources, you know, we didn't think about how we were going to sustain these resources. So, you know, there's no shame in continuing to adjust this, because like I said, sometimes, you know, we have to make a change quickly. But you know, how we use these, or let these 5 things help guide our change to be successful is really the deal breaker. So I would encourage you to think about this. As we're trying to carry out complex change, or as it says here, managing complex change. Now, maybe we have a better idea for why maybe some things weren't successful, or why people were confused, or why people did resist. But now we know, and so we can use this particular resource to help us avoid the things that tend to trip up change and cause change to not be successful, or not even have a chance of being successful. So the resource we were just using now is something called Managing Complex Change. And if you Google Managing Complex Change, you will see a lot of different, especially doing image search, you'll see a lot of different versions of this chart. And so rather than give you one particular resource, I want to encourage you to Google Managing Complex Change. And there's a lot of different visuals. It's the same information, but presented in different ways for sure. So again, let's go to the chat here. So if we feel comfortable enough, or anybody would like to share, what examples can you give of how you managed complex change or you didn't manage change? And if things didn't go so well, what was missing? And also any questions or comments before we move to our final resource that we're going to learn about today regarding leading and managing change. So Ms. Julie, I'll turn it over to you to facilitate our chat.
Okay, I'm ready. One of the things that I always think of when I see that chart is how many different ways I've messed it up.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I can go back and I'm like, I can probably think of an example. When you use that iPad card example, oh yeah, been there, done that. And I believe that chart is so helpful in helping us to plan for change. I know, unfortunately, many of us weren't able to really take it at that level when we had to plan for the changes happening this year. But, through that reflective piece, I think it can be so helpful.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know. I just think, I think well-meaning people, we want to do new things. We want to bring about change, but, and I, like you said, that the iPad card example is one of my favorites because I've lived that several times. Even when I knew better, I lived it over and over. Because you're well-meaning people and we want to do what's best, but then we just kind of forget that, all these pieces need to be in place, or we need to be continually supporting people to understand these pieces as we, monitor and adjust and move forward with the change. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
What are people saying? Are the people saying anything?
Nope, we don't have anything in the chat. We're good.
People are like, nope, got it. Let's go. Okay. Okay, I can handle that. Okay, so far, 3 resources, and now we're going to add our final resource, and it is, we're going to refer to it as managing transitions, okay? And this is a fairly new, I'd say maybe in the last 4 years or so, I've discovered this research around transitions. And it just really took my fascination with change to the next level. And I think that this transitions piece is really what begins to connect all these pieces together. So I'm going to attempt to, even though, you may have learned some new things today or been reacquainted with things that you've forgotten about. Hopefully we've got enough in our brain right now that we can apply and apply the 3 or connect the 3 resources we've seen so far to this whole idea about transitions. So, I think what I found so fascinating, or why this really caught my attention, is because as long, when I experienced learning about how people accept change, and definitely after it became my responsibility with the Academy to teach how people accept change, because it's one of our foundational curriculum pieces, content pieces that we do with people. I thought, we gave people this, and we said it's not a clean, consistent line forward. And so, for the longest, I was like, oh, please, people, don't ask me what is happening during this time, because I'm just going to raise my hand and admit my ignorance. When it said, 3 years, I'm like, man, so people just sitting around not doing anything, and then suddenly they decide, oh, well, I should probably do this. 5 years, that can't be possible, because it's people's job to carry out these changes as part of their job responsibilities or whatever. So what is happening during this time? And so I think that was the thing that made me really excited and has continued to keep me really interested in this whole idea of transitions. So we're going to look at the work of a guy named William Bridges. And, William Bridges says this about change and transitions. It's not the change, it's really the transitions that will do us in if we're not careful. And so let's operationalize what does Bridges mean by change and transition. So I'll share this with you and let you read that for a moment. And so he goes further in differentiating between change and transition. And so again, I'll let you give you a moment to look at that. And I definitely know as I've become more interested in supporting adult learners and become interested in understanding my own self and my own learning better, this whole idea of transition, man, this William Bridges has helped me learn, continues to help me understand so much about what's happening, because, he just says transition is psychological. It's what happens when people come to terms with a new situation. He acknowledges, this is something that happens, we can't just say, oh, well, they're an adult, they need to get over it. Because we all experience the impact of transition. And like he says there, it's about ending. Okay, transition means letting go of something or leaving something behind as we transition to another thing. And he says, transition takes more time. And he says change usually happens quickly, but true transition takes time. And I love this last one. It is experienced internally. Sometimes if as leaders, for our own selves or for the people that we lead and that we work with, it can be difficult, because like I said, I keep on saying, I'm kind of a repeater, I know, but people are proud. And I think maybe sometimes in the past, I just speak from my own experience, I saw it as a sign of weakness if I, as a teacher leader, if I didn't immediately get on the change and support the principal in the change and begin to actively work to carry out the change and to help other people implement the change, that meant that I wasn't a real leader, or that I wasn't a team player, or that I was weak. Because transition, like I said, it's sometimes hard to see in people. It's sometimes even hard to recognize in ourselves. And so we're going to do this kind of like we did the implementation dip. If you will, take a piece of paper or whatever you're working with and kind of sketch out this picture here. I'll give you a moment to do that. And just like we did with the implementation dip, we're going to create our own resource. So by putting, I should say, in Bridges' model, he does not have innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, laggards on his model. I've put that there as a way to connect, what we've been doing and I think help us, deepen our understanding of this and see the connection. So just to be fair to Mr. Bridges on this. So let's jump in here. So at the top here, we're talking about time. That's what this these waves, these lines, how the image is divided up is telling us. Okay, it's time. So transition definitely is tied in with time, and so that's what we need to remember as we think about transitions and how he's set up this model. And so we're going to talk about 3 phases in the model. And so here's the first phase. Bridges calls it the ending, the losing, the letting go. And y'all, throughout all this, I'm going to bring back through this idea of as leaders, if we fail to acknowledge emotions, okay, and maybe even acknowledge our own emotions, then if we don't, and if we're not prepared to support people, it's not going to be a happy time. As my mama would say, there's people not going to have a very sweet spirit as they transition, as they go through a transition during change. They're going to be resistant because this is scary, and people manifest these emotions in all different kinds of ways. As we talked about earlier, we're going to see Bridges refer to all of these things happening as a part of transition. So what do we see in behavior-wise in phase one? So when people are having to change, having to move from the way things have always been to a different way of working, a different way of doing, these are some of the things that we see. And I bet that is not a surprise for any of us, that these would be the emotions and these would be the behaviors that we would see when we're first asking people to change the way they do things. So that's phase one. Let's go ahead and talk about phase two. Okay. We call phase two the neutral zone. Now, innovators don't generally go through phase one, because it's their idea. They're the ones that put it out there. So they're not going to probably go through fear, denial, anger, sadness, etc. So let's now drop down and think about the early adopters as they move into phase two, okay? Because, they're the people who are going to step out there and get the change going. If we're looking at how we connect the Bridges model to the things we've talked about previously. And once again, we've got to acknowledge those emotions. And so as our early adopters start moving into the neutral zone, and we're going to have other people follow, here's kind of what we can expect according to Bridges. Even the people who are the early adopters, the people who are the doers, the people who are trying to make the change happen, I think it's fair to say that they're still sometimes going to have a little anxiety, a little trepidation about letting go of the old. So they may be trying to adapt to the new, but they're still attached somewhat to the old. Even in early adopters, there may be confusion or uncertainty and little patience because, again, they're taking the work of someone else and trying to make it happen. And so, that may cause people to be confused and to be impatient, depending on how much support they're getting. Our early adopters even may, the longer this goes and as we go through the dips, they may resent the change. And even though they're the people who we've said, jump out and maybe try things first, they may still be a little skeptical deep down as they move forward with the change. But here's the kind of cool thing about the neutral zone, okay, is that it can also be a time of great creativity. So if you think about those early adopters and the early majority trying to make the vision of the innovator come to pass and adapting it and making it work, sometimes we get inspired by that. Okay. Ask questions, we make challenges to the status quo. You know, we may do things and ask for forgiveness later. You know, all those things we talked about with early adopters. The early majority, you know, are going to get excited about it. The more they see and you know, they hopefully are going to follow in behind the early adopters. And so it's not, you know, I want us to think that, you know, this time in change, as we move through change, doesn't have to be negative. You know, it's the time to try things out, to make mistakes, to do a lot of different things as we figure out how to adapt the change and to support it to be successful. And so what's that looking like right now? So if we think about, you know, the rate at how people accept change, you know, you see it moves right along there, that you know, early adopters are always going to be ahead a little bit, or they're going to be ones that are leading the charge. Remember, innovators really don't go through transitions, like we said before. And then you see there, you know, the early majority will eventually fall in a little later, late majority. And then, you know, our laggards, sometimes, unfortunately, folks, they never get out of that first phase. And so, you know, that's just, I think, something we need to know about and remember as we're figuring out how to lead this and transitions. So finally, let's talk about the third phase, the new beginning. Once again, there are emotions attached to every phase. And as leaders, you know, we have to respond to that. And, you know, it's interesting because I think, you know, people may say that they want things to be new. You know, this needs to change. This needs to be better. You know, this is not working. We need to do things differently. But I think it's just natural to fear them at the same time. Because, you know, when we get to the point in a transition, new beginnings can cause these things. I like that last one a lot. It can disrupt the cover created by the confusion in the neutral zone. When we actually get to that place when we're, you know, we're really starting to tip in our change, you know, there's a lot of things that can happen. So as leaders, you know, how can we, you know, how can we what can we do to try to set ourselves up for success in terms of helping people through ourselves and others through the transition? So Bridges talks about the 4 Ps, and I think this information is on the handout, the other handout that you have about change. So maybe don't feel like you have to write everything down here, but I do want to have us look at this for a second. So, you know, people need to know the why. People need to know the purpose. And you know, people are going to wrestle with the why and the purpose at different rates. Definitely need to have a picture of what the outcome will be like, or what we attend to. So that vision piece has to be there. We need leaders, and as leaders, I think we need to help people, you know, see in their imagination what the change, you know, the positive things that the change may bring about, before they can give their hearts to it. This very much speaks to the early majority people. You know, they are, remember we said they're moving on emotion. And so they need to be able to see and to talk about what it's going to look like. And then we know from managing complex change that we just talked about, there's got to be a plan. And then within that plan, I need to know my part. I need to know my part. I need to know what's expected of me. And I need to know what is maybe not my responsibility. you know, I think this is a good time for us as leaders to think about, you know, how, based on what we understand about people, how they accept change, you know, all these things that make adults complex. How do we set people up for success? You know, how do we give people responsibilities, put them in situations where they're going to have a better chance of being successful? Now, that doesn't mean that we always get to do, you know, what we're good at or what we like. But I definitely think that, you know, as leaders, we've got to acknowledge that as we said before, we have all these different people at our disposal and to carry the change out. So what part is each person going to play? And so if you think back again to the difference between change and transition, like I said, this stuff about transition really helped me to start understanding, well, you know, what's happening during this time. If we say that it may take up to 5 years for people to fully accept and implement a change, well, you know, this is what's happening. The things we've talked about, the emotions, the reactions, the needs, that's what's happening. And so if we remember, again, let's tie it to this. Innovators, they don't really transition, or they transition to the next thing. Okay. Think about it, may take early adopters a year to get to the new beginning. It may take early majority 3 years to work through it all. Late majority 5 years. Laggards, you know, may never, they may move to the neutral zone, you know, and they just may barely get to the new beginning, if at all. And we know that, you know, the way that this can look is like our implementation dip. I find, you know, I bet we could all think if we think about changes we've gone through and transitions we've made, you know, there's a lot of wallowing around in the neutral zone. You know, we can get there and then think, oh, we've, you know, we've managed to let go and now we're moving forward, only to have a setback. That's the implementation dip. You know, it's going to be part of the whole act of transition. To truly get the majority of the people over to the new beginning, people are going to struggle. You know, people are going to struggle, and not just struggle with maybe the tools or the skills or whatever, but it's really this emotional commitment to do things in a new way. So, you know, we have people and then they're good employees and they're going to do what they need to do. But again, remember, transition is happening internally. And so even though people may be going through the motions and you know, we need to check on them, because, you know, change and transition is really about not just doing things in a new way, but seeing ourselves as new people and this emotional commitment. So I'm going to take us back as we kind of come to the end of this. I'm going to take us back to something we talked about earlier with implementation dip. Bridges calls this the marathon effect. So as we said earlier, when we were talking about implementation dip, you know, some decisions made at the district level, and that's passed down to the principals, and then the principal passes it down to the leadership team, and then, you know, it starts to roll out to everyone else. Well, you know, the closer it is to being my idea or my vision or our vision, well, and then we're passing it down, we're going to move through the change process faster. Sometimes it's because, you know, they see the big picture before other people even know the race has begun, as it says here. And so if we think about, you know, our early majority, our late majority, even our laggards, we have to remember that, you know, we may go through these emotions or these things quickly, but they may have a harder time, just for all the reasons we've talked about, the things that, how they're wired up, the things that make them them. And so, you know, Bridges reminds us that anytime you ask human beings to change, there's going to be transition. And I love this. He seems like he might be kind of a fun guy to hang out with. We can't avoid it, but we can manage it. And as he says there, you know, I want to come through in one piece, we have to manage it. So I think one way to do that is to think about the model we looked at earlier. It was a way to help manage change. There's one roadmap we can use to, like I said, to help us have at least a chance of change really happening. The last thing I want to offer here is another strategy that Bridges suggests is having a transition monitoring team. I'll let you look at that. I think oftentimes this can be the leadership team. So as formal leaders, as district leaders, as principals, as assistant principals, even as informal leaders, teacher leaders, whatever, we don't have to go it alone. You know, we can put together a team that you know, because we are monitoring people's emotions and we are monitoring people's thinking. As a, you know, the most dedicated principal, the most dedicated assistant principal, you know, we can't know everyone at a depth of all the time as to how they're experiencing change. And so when we put together this team and we're very clear about the function of the team, this can really help us to truly support people and provide differentiated support as people go through change. So the other handout that Julie shared with you just gives you some additional information, some additional ideas about how you can manage transitions, okay? How do you manage endings? How might you manage the neutral zone? And so I'm just giving you that as a resource to take away. Like I said, strategies, ways to approach this. So hopefully that will be helpful to you and can add more and deepen what we've been talking about just in the last bit about transitions. So 4 things. Hopefully, we've seen the connection here between these pieces. You know, how does the implementation dip connect with how people accept change? You know, I think all of this can be seen in transitions. And so that's what I was referring to earlier about, you know, even if we're familiar with this information, one of my favorite things to do, I think this speaks to the level of nerd I've become about all this, is to make the connections. You know, how, you know, one resource alone can be very powerful, but what additional power can that resource have when we can connect it to another resource, and we can start looking at the power and the connections that can occur when, you know, when we're using all of this knowledge, all of this research, all of this wisdom to help us and support us in building our own toolkit about how to lead and manage change. So we're about up to our time. So quickly, I want to just give us a moment. Anything that's swimming around in our head about change? So Ms. Julie, if you'll check on folks and see. Just make sure everybody's head's still above water, maybe.
Okay, I'm watching. So much information. I love the transition piece, Amanda. I think that to me, it really just, it adds another layer to really help you
I
understand.
know. Yeah, girl, I'm telling you, it was like the Rosetta Stone for me. I mean, it just made so, and you know, and like I said, I've definitely worked with these other change resources longer than transitions. And so I just am still learning about transitions and still thinking about it. And man, I'm just like, man, that is just spot on. That is the deal right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not the presenter to influence what the rest of you think, but I'm just saying, for me, transitions were huge. Yeah.
Yeah. Any thoughts or insights from you guys that are there that you just want to unmute and say? I mean, you can just talk to us at this point.
Yeah, let me forward up a little bit. So remember, you know, we started out our time together today with this quote from Sharon Merriam. And I hope that what we've talked about today and the conversations we've had, or the thinking we've had, you know, this is one of those times when I really wish we could all be in the same room, because there are a lot of physical things we can do to help, even, you know, experiential things that we can do to help us even further take the change deep. You know, we're going to do the best we can with what we've got at this point, working virtually. But you know, this whole idea is, as leaders, you know, I hope we are believing that we've got to be the type of leader that sees the adults we work with as more than just machines. Like I said, do we extend to them the same grace and the same understanding as we extend to students? Do we extend to our parents the same grace and understanding that we extend to our students? Do we extend to ourselves the same grace and understanding that we try to extend to our students? Knowing that just because we're adult, it doesn't mean that suddenly these things aren't important. And so I am going to give us a moment. If anyone wants to share, if you share one thing that you would do differently as a result of today's discussion, because that's, you know, this can be overwhelming, but as someone said before, I forgot who it was, said break change down into chunks, into small pieces. And then that's for us as well as leaders. What's maybe a small thing or one thing you could do differently? Knowing that, you know, leading and managing change, I think, is a lifetime journey. And hopefully we never stop learning and reflecting and thinking about how we do this. So anybody want to share what they may do differently?
I stepped away for a little bit. I'm sorry, I had to go to the cafeteria, but so I may have missed some things. But one thing I think that I would do differently is give our staff some of this language as far as early adopters and innovators. We have done different Enneagrams, and they know their colors for true colors and all of those things. But I think to know this language and know who our people are, who the people are that are those people that are going to innovate and jump out there, and who are those early adopters. And, you know, I don't think anybody wants to raise their hand and say I'm a laggard, but you know, we can think about how to be creative with some of that wording. But sometimes we just need to call a spade, and they need to sometimes own that. And typically our staff members will know who those people are. But I do think it would be important for everyone to kind of know that language and know where they fit, because sometimes our innovators need to know who should I go to bounce ideas off of, so I can maybe scale mine down. Or if they're the people that are scared to move, maybe they need to pair up with the innovators to make sure maybe they can amp their game up a little bit. And so I think that would be helpful for them to know that language.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the ways that I think I've grown in my understanding of this is probably the first few times I was exposed to this, how people accept change. I think maybe sometimes it's presented as some of the levels are less than, like the innovators are the best and the early adopters are the next best. And then, you know, the early majority of the bronze medal winners and the late majority get the participation ribbon, and the laggards have to stay in study hall while the rest of us go to field day. And what I've grown to understand, and I'm still understanding, is, yeah, everybody plays their own part. And like I said earlier, sometimes we need late majority people to ask those hard questions, to hold us back. And, even with our laggards, sometimes if we really look at the behavior of laggards, their behavior is data as well. And, I hope that, as I continue to grow as a leader, that, I can not just dismiss laggards completely, but say, well, this person's a laggard. What is that telling me about my leadership? Or what is that telling me about what we're trying to do if these people are that resistant? So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's great data to talk to those people and really understand why they're in that position, because sometimes it isn't, their own intrinsic things that are going on, but sometimes there's something we don't recognize in our own leadership or around the building, or those unspoken things that may be happening on their collaborative team. So you're right. I mean, it's definitely data that we can use for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your insight. Yeah. Anybody else?
We've got one in the chat from Melissa. She says, first change for my building is to enact a transition management team. Love that idea. We have a leadership team that's been through ALA, but this is too small to handle this task on their own. I would love to plant a transition team member on every grade level content area team in my building to ensure people have someone they feel comfortable with communicating their feelings about the transitions. Great ideas. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And how is that going to help to continue to strengthen our culture when, as leaders, a building leader, we say, hey, I care enough about your experience and I care enough about you, and I see you as an individual that we're going to have multiple people, and we've been very intentional and thoughtful about who those people are, so that we're really truly trying to hear everyone's voice. So yeah, very good, very good. Well, y'all, it is 11:30. The last thing I want to leave you with, just real quick, is as I said earlier, I love to talk about change. I love to think about it. I love to hear your ideas. I just love to, so that's my contact information, or the best way to email me. And so if you have questions, anything, it's one of the great joys of my life the last few years is to get to have these great conversations with innovative, thoughtful, wonderful leaders. So reach out, and I thank Dr. Workman for inviting me to do this, and hope it's been beneficial. And I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Workman, for any last announcements or anything you have.
All right. Thank you. You can stop the recording, Amanda.
Okay.
Appreciate you guys being here. And I know we'll have several that watch the recording as well. And so just let us know how we can continue to support you with whatever it is